1962, you entered the Georgia State Senate. What made you decide to suddenly go into politics?
At that time, I was the chairman of a local school board, the Sumter County School Board. And the politicians in Georgia were very conservative. And they were saying, no, not one. And which meant that if a black child entered a white classroom, that they would shut down the entire public school system. So in a very naive way, I decided that I would run for the Senate to try to protect the local schools, the public school system.
In 1966, Jimmy Carter lost his first race to become governor of Georgia. However, in the next election, he was victorious and entered the governor's mansion in Atlanta on January the 12th, 1971.
No poor, rural, weak, or black person should ever have to bear the additional burden of being deprived of the opportunity of an education, a job, or simple justice.
On December 12, 1974, Jimmy Carter announced he would run for president with a promise of truth in government in the wake of the Watergate scandal. After a 2-year hard-fought campaign, he defeated Gerald Ford. And on November the 2nd, 1976, this one-time rural farmer from Plains, Georgia, was elected the 39th President of the United States.
I, Jimmy Carter, do solemnly swear
that I will faithfully execute
that I will faithfully execute
the office of President of the United States.
The office of President of the United States.
As the 39th President of the United States, what do you feel were your greatest successes?
Well, I kept our country at peace, which has happened very rarely since the Second World War. And I tried to work for peace between other people who were not directly related to the United States, like between Egypt and Israel. I normalized diplomatic relations with China. And I implemented a very strong human rights commitment that brought about a change throughout Latin America, for instance, from totalitarian military dictatorships to democracies. So I would say the promotion of peace and human rights were the two things that, of which I'm most proud. And we had a very wonderful environmental record at that time. We kind of foresaw, maybe 30 or 40 years before it became a crisis, that we needed to conserve energy and have alternate sources of energy, cut down on our waste of carbon and other fuels of that kind to protect the environment. So those are the three things that I think of right offhand.
It was in 1978 that President Carter brought together Prime Minister Menachem Begin of Israel and President Anwar Sadat of Egypt to Camp David to put an end to 3 decades of war. Despite days of hard negotiations brokered by President Carter, the peace deal seemed set for failure.
I believe you saved the peace agreement at Camp David when you went to Prime Minister Menachem Begin's quarters and gave him signed photographs for his grandchildren.
The peace agreement that I was trying to negotiate had broken down. We went our 13th day at Camp David, and I decided that it was over because Prime Minister Begin was so adamant about not removing his Israeli settlements from Egyptian territory. And so I had given up, and my wife had gone back to Washington to prepare for our return to Washington in defeat or failure. And Begin asked me for a signed photograph of me and him and Sadat to each one of his 8 grandchildren. So instead of just saying best wishes Jimmy Carter, I got my secretary to get their names, and I put with love and best wishes too, and I put his names of his grandchildren. And when he got the photographs, he was quite angry with me at the time. He just said, "Thank you, Mr. President," and turned around and he began to read. And he called out the name of his first grandchild, and then he called out the name of his second grandchild, and he had tears running down his cheeks, and so did I. And then he said, in effect, "Why don't we try one more time?" And so we tried one more time, and we were successful.